Just kill me fast, she begged. But I saw her broken, and I couldn't walk away.
It was a late evening, the kind where the streets are quiet and most people have already gone home, leaving only the occasional car passing by and the distant sound of city life.
He was walking home after a long day that had left him tired in every possible way, physically, mentally, and emotionally. The weight of his own worries pressed down on his shoulders. He had deadlines, problems at work, and a long list of personal issues waiting for him at home. In moments like this, it's easy to get lost in your own world, to walk past others without noticing them. That's exactly what he was doing when he first saw her. She was sitting on a bench under a dim street light, her posture slouched, her shoulders heavy as if carrying an invisible burden that had grown too big to bear. Something about her stillness stopped him in his tracks. At first, he tried to convince himself to keep walking. "It's not my business," he whispered silently. "She's a stranger."
There's nothing I can do. But there was something about her, something that made him pause and look again.
Breath. Her hair fell over her face in messy strands, partially hiding her features, but even in the dim light, he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. They were not the tired eyes of someone who had simply had a long day. They were the tired eyes of someone who had been fighting battles that no one could see for a very long time. He considered turning around and walking away. After all, he was just one person. What could he possibly do for someone in so much pain? And yet, the words that escaped her lips before he even realized it made him stop completely. They were quiet, almost a whisper, yet they cut through the noise of the empty street like a sudden sharp wind. "Just kill me fast," she said. The desperation in her voice was chilling. And for a moment, he froze. His heart skipped a beat. It was not just the words themselves. It was the way she said them, the hopelessness behind them, the emptiness that seemed to surround her like a shadow. She wasn't asking for attention or drama. She was broken, and it was real. He felt a surge of fear mixed with something else, something he couldn't quite name at first. Part of him wanted to run away, to pretend he hadn't heard, to get out of a situation he was not prepared for. But another part, a deeper part, whispered that he could not walk away. Not now. Not when someone's entire world seemed to be collapsing around them. He took a cautious step closer, careful not to startle her, careful not to make her feel judged. He had no idea what to say or how to help, but he knew one thing. He could not ignore her.
"Hey," he said softly, his voice steady but gentle.
She flinched slightly at first, her eyes widening, then quickly dropping to the ground as if she had hoped no one would notice her. He didn't press. He didn't demand answers. He simply sat down a little distance away, giving her space but letting her know he was there. The silence stretched for a moment, heavy and uncomfortable, but it was a silence filled with the weight of unspoken stories. He didn't want to rush her. He didn't want to force her to speak. He just wanted her to know that someone was present, that she was not entirely alone. Slowly she lifted her head, her eyes meeting his. There was a flicker of surprise there, as if she couldn't believe that someone had actually stopped. She was quiet for a long moment, then spoke again, her voice trembling slightly. You don't have to stay."
I'm fine. But her words rang hollow.
Thus, he could tell she was far from fine. He could see the layers of hurt and pain behind her attempt at normalcy, the fear of being judged or misunderstood, and the exhaustion of pretending to be okay. It was a mask she had learned to wear for years, and for a brief moment it slipped. He didn't respond immediately. Despair. Instead, he simply nodded, acknowledging her words without agreeing with them. He knew that whatever came next had to be done with care. He had no magic solution, no sudden revelation that could fix years of silent suffering. All he had was presence, attention, and the willingness to listen. And sometimes, that was more than enough to begin the first tiny shift in a person who had felt invisible for too long. Minutes passed, and the quiet streets seemed to stretch endlessly around them. He noticed small details, the way her fingers nervously twisted in her lap, the faint tremor in her shoulders, the way she seemed to shrink into herself as if trying to disappear completely. Each detail told him a story of struggle, loss, and endurance that words could hardly capture. She had been through something, or many somethings, that had worn her down to this fragile state, and yet, sitting there, even in her brokenness, there was a glimmer of something human that refused to vanish entirely. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, the part of her that still wanted to be seen, still longed for connection. He realized then that this was a pivotal moment. He could leave and let the night swallow her up, or he could stay and offer the smallest form of support, his attention. It seemed insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but sometimes noticing someone, even without solving their problems, could mean the difference between despair and hope. He chose to stay. He made that choice quietly, without grand gestures, simply by remaining present and refusing to turn his back. As he sat there, he began to speak gently, not asking for details she might not want to share, not pushing her to explain herself. He simply offered words that were honest and kind. "I can't imagine how hard things must be," he said softly. "I don't have the answers, but I want you to know you're not invisible.
You matter."
Her eyes flickered at his words, a mix of skepticism and cautious hope.
It was a tiny spark, almost extinguished by years of pain, but it was there. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt the faintest relief that someone had noticed, that someone had acknowledged her suffering without judgment. The night stretched on, and they remained there in silence for a while, sharing the space without the pressure of conversation. He didn't try to force her to speak, didn't try to make her feel better with cliches or empty reassurances. He simply sat and let her exist, let her feel seen in a world that had so often ignored her. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tension in her body began to ease. Her shoulders dropped slightly, the tremor in her hands lessened, and the heaviness around her eyes softened just a fraction. It was not a complete transformation. She was still broken, still weary, but it was the beginning of something. The beginning of the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she did not have to face her struggles alone. By the time he finally stood to leave, the quiet street had become almost comforting in its stillness. He had no guarantees, no promises that things would get better immediately, but he had done something small and human, something that mattered. He had refused to walk away when someone's life, or at least a part of it, hung in the balance, and in doing so he realized that sometimes the act of presence, of noticing and caring without judgment, could be the first step toward healing. That evening, as he walked home under the dim glow of the streetlights, he carried within the silent knowledge that even a brief moment of connection could create ripples far larger than he could see. After that quiet evening on the bench, the woman finally began to speak more openly. Her voice was low, hesitant at first, as if she had not spoken to anyone in a long time. Each word came carefully, weighed down by years of pain and disappointment. She spoke about her life, not in dramatic bursts, but in quiet, truthful fragments. It was as though she had been carrying her story alone for so long that saying it out loud felt almost impossible, yet necessary. She spoke of moments when she had trusted people, thinking they would stand by her side, only to be let down repeatedly.
Friends who promised loyalty vanished when she needed them most. Family members, though close in distance, had often been emotionally distant, unable to understand the battles she fought silently.
Each instance, each small betrayal had chipped away at her confidence and hope. He listened silently, trying to take in everything without interrupting, without offering empty reassurances that could feel meaningless. The weight of her story pressed against him, heavy but real, and he realized that sometimes simply hearing someone, letting them speak without judgment, is more powerful than advice or solutions. She paused, staring at the ground, her fingers twisting nervously.
I've tried so hard, she whispered.
I've tried to move on, to forget the pain, but it's always there. Everywhere I go, it follows me.
And no matter what I do, I feel like I'm failing. This wasn't just a temporary sadness or a bad day. It was the exhaustion of a soul that had been worn down over years. Each failure, each disappointment had piled on top of the last, leaving her feeling small, powerless, and unseen. He noticed the subtle ways she tried to protect herself, the shield she had built over the years. There was a quiet defensiveness in her posture, the way she would glance at him and then quickly look away, almost afraid of being understood. She had learned to hide the depth of her pain, to cover it with a mask of indifference, because showing vulnerability had too often led to more hurt. And yet, despite that armor, she had allowed herself for this brief moment to let someone in.
It was a small, fragile act of trust, but it mattered immensely.
He didn't respond with cliches like, things will get better, or just stay positive, because he knew those words would be empty.
Bay. Instead, he simply acknowledged her feelings, letting her know that what she experienced was real and valid.
It's okay to feel this way,
he said gently back. It makes sense that you feel tired and overwhelmed. What you've been through is hard, and it's not your fault.
She blinked, a flicker of surprise crossing her face.
Base. Most people had either ignored her struggles or told her to simply move on. To hear someone accept her pain without judgment was new, and it carried a strange, subtle relief.
As she continued to share, small details of her life emerged, moments of loneliness during holidays, the sting of broken friendships, the anxiety that kept her awake at night. She spoke of dreams that had been postponed, opportunities lost, and ambitions quietly abandoned.
Psst. Each sentence painted a picture of a life filled with invisible battles. Battles fought silently while the world carried on as if nothing had happened. And through it all, she had kept going, even when the burden felt unbearable. That resilience, though hidden behind tears and exhaustion, shone through faintly, like a tiny flame struggling to stay lit in the darkness. He realized that her brokenness wasn't sudden. It was the result of years of living through disappointments and struggles that no one else noticed. The world had continued to move around her, full of people chasing their own dreams and concerns, while she quietly carried her pain alone. And yet, she was still there. She had survived everything life had thrown at her, even when she didn't believe she could. That fact alone was remarkable, even if she couldn't see it herself. But there were moments when she would laugh softly, almost without realizing it, when recalling small, happy memories from her childhood or times when things had briefly gone right. Those moments were fleeting but important. They were reminders that beneath the pain, there was still a person capable of joy, capable of connection, capable of hope. He encouraged her to remember these moments, to notice them when they appeared, no matter how small. They were proof that life could contain brightness, even in the darkest times.
He also noticed how careful she was with her words.
She didn't want to burden him or anyone else, even though she desperately needed to share. She was used to keeping her struggles to herself, and opening up was both terrifying and relieving.
Dispatch, he understood that this was not about him being a savior. It was about being present and human, about letting her know that someone cared enough to listen without judgment. That simple act of attention, of listening fully and patiently, was slowly helping her feel less invisible. Hours passed without either of them realizing it. The city around them had grown quiet, the distant sounds fading into soft night air. In that space, they were not strangers anymore. There was a fragile connection forming, built not on dramatic gestures but on honesty and presence. But she realized that he wasn't there to judge, wasn't there to tell her what to do, and wasn't there to dismiss her feelings. He was simply there, steady and attentive, offering her the simple, profound gift of being seen. Through the night, she began to reflect on herself with a slightly different perspective. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to acknowledge that her struggles were valid, that her pain mattered, and that she had the right to feel the way she did. She realized that it wasn't weakness to feel overwhelmed. It was human. And it wasn't a failure to ask for help or to allow someone else into her life, even if just for a moment. She had been carrying a heavy burden alone, and now she understood that sharing it, even partially, could make it lighter. By the time dawn approached, the woman was not suddenly healed, nor was her pain gone. But something important had shifted. The walls she had built around herself were not completely gone, but there were cracks, small openings through which light could enter. She felt, for the first time in a long while, that she might not have to face life's struggles entirely alone. The idea was fragile and tentative, but it was there. And that small change, that faint sense of possibility, was enough to begin the journey toward hope. As he left that quiet street, walking away with the rising sun painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold, he felt the weight of what had happened. He had not fixed her life, had not solved her problems, and he did not claim to have done anything heroic. But he had witnessed her pain, acknowledged it, and offered his presence without judgment. And in that simple act, he had made a difference. He had reminded her, however briefly, that there are still people in the world who see, who care, and who will not walk away. He understood something vital about human connection that night. Sometimes the smallest gestures, the willingness to listen, to stay, to care, can ripple outward in ways that change someone's path forever. And sometimes the most profound help we can give is not advice or solutions, but the quiet assurance that someone is there, that they are present, and that they care enough not to ignore a broken soul. That realization stayed with him long after the street had emptied, long after the first rays of sunlight had brightened the city. It reminded him, and would always remind him, that even in the darkest moments, the smallest acts of kindness and attention can make the difference between despair and the first fragile glimmer of hope. He knew that being present with her was not enough to magically fix everything in her life. He understood that she had endured years of pain and disappointment, and no single conversation could erase that. Yet something in him refused to walk away. He had seen her brokenness, her exhaustion, her hopelessness, and he could not turn his back as if she didn't matter. For a moment, he thought about leaving, telling himself that he was not equipped to help, that professionals should handle these situations. But deep down, he knew that leaving her alone in that darkness would only reinforce the sense of isolation she had felt for so long. Sometimes he realized what a person truly needed was not advice or solutions. It was presence, attention, and understanding. And he could offer that. She sat quietly, her eyes fixed on the ground, her hands folded tightly in her lap. It was obvious that she had been through much more than anyone could see. He could see the strain in her face, the shadows under her eyes, the small tremble in her fingers. Every small detail told a story of struggle and resilience that words could hardly capture. And yet, even in her quiet despair, there was a faint flicker of something he couldn't ignore. an unspoken wish to be heard, to be seen, to be acknowledged. That small flicker was enough to make him decide he would stay, at least until she felt a little safer, a little less alone. He began to speak softly, carefully choosing words that carried no judgment.
I don't know everything you've been through, he said, and I can't fix the past. But I can sit with you right now, and I can listen. He waited, giving her space to respond. At first, she said nothing. Her silence was heavy, filled with the weight of unspoken pain. But after a few moments, she slowly lifted her gaze to meet his. Bale. There was a hesitancy in her eyes, as if she were testing him, wondering if he would stay or if he would disappear like so many others had. When he simply nodded, without pressure or expectation, it was as if a small door had opened inside her. She began to speak, and her voice was low but steady, carrying years of unshared struggles. She told him about the nights when she felt utterly alone, when sleep seemed impossible and the world felt too heavy to face. She spoke of moments when she had tried to push forward, to rebuild her life, only to be met with repeated setbacks. Every effort seemed to end in disappointment, leaving her with the sense that she was failing not because of lack of trying, but because life itself seemed to conspire against her. As she spoke, he realized that her pain was not about one incident. It was the accumulation of years of silent battles, unnoticed by the people around her. Her suffering had been quiet, invisible, yet it had shaped every part of her life. He did not interrupt or offer advice. Instead, he listened, letting her words fill the space without judgment. He knew that sometimes the act of truly listening is more powerful than any words of comfort or guidance. She needed to feel understood, to feel that someone acknowledged the depth of her struggle. And so he stayed, quietly, patiently, letting her pour out her heart. He noticed small details in her story, the way she hesitated before admitting certain truths, the way she softened when recalling happier memories, the way her body relaxed slightly when she felt heard. Each detail was a reminder that human connection, even in its simplest form, can begin to heal wounds that have festered for years. As the conversation continued, he encouraged her to focus on small steps, not by telling her what to do, but by guiding her gently. "Let's just think about the next hour," he suggested softly. "Not tomorrow, not next week, just the next hour." What's something small you can do that makes it through? She considered his words, a faint trace of relief crossing her face. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to think about something manageable, something within her control. It was a subtle shift, but it mattered. Life had always felt overwhelming to her, a series of impossible challenges stacked one on top of another. By breaking it down into the smallest, most immediate step, he helped her see that even in the darkest moments, there could be a sense of direction. They talked about small, practical things, breathing exercises to calm anxiety, reaching out to a trusted friend or counselor, and finding small moments of comfort in daily life. He didn't force her to act on anything immediately, but he emphasized that even tiny actions could make a difference. She began to understand that recovery wasn't about sudden miracles or instant solutions. It was about taking one small step at a time. And sometimes simply acknowledging that a step exists is enough to start moving forward.
As hours passed, the tension in her body slowly eased.
He noticed that she was beginning to trust him, to let down some of the walls she had built around herself over years of disappointment. She smiled faintly when recalling small memories of joy, even laughing softly at times. Those moments were fragile but meaningful. A reminder that beneath the pain, she was still human, still capable of connection, still capable of hope. He encouraged her to hold on to those moments, to let them be small anchors in the storm of her emotions. Even tiny glimpses of happiness, he explained, could provide strength for the next difficult moment. He also shared small insights from his own life, not to overshadow her story, but to remind her that struggle is universal. Everyone faces moments of doubt, fear, and loneliness, and acknowledging them does not make someone weak. In fact, he gently suggested, admitting vulnerability is a sign of courage. She listened carefully, absorbing his words in a way that suggested she had rarely heard such understanding without judgment. His presence was a rare kind of support, consistent, calm, and non-intrusive, yet deeply validating. By the time dawn began to break, painting the sky in soft, warm hues, she felt a small but important shift within herself. She was not completely healed, nor was her pain gone, but the impossible weight she had carried for so long felt a little lighter. For the first time in a very long while, she allowed herself to imagine the possibility of hope. Not a grand, unrealistic hope, but a fragile, careful hope that things could improve, that life could contain moments of peace and connection, even amid struggle. It was tentative, delicate, and easily broken. But it was there, and that was enough for now. He understood that he had done something small but significant. He had not offered dramatic solutions or instant fixes. He had not promised that everything would suddenly be better. Instead, he had done something far more meaningful. He had refused to walk away when someone needed him. He had acknowledged her pain, and he had offered his presence without judgment. And in that quiet, patient act, he had helped her take the first tentative steps toward feeling less alone, toward believing, however faintly, that life could hold moments of hope. As he finally stood to leave, he noticed the subtle changes in her demeanor, the small lift of her chin, the lessened tension in her shoulders, the faint glimmer of curiosity in her eyes. These were not grand transformations, but they were signs that the smallest acts of care can ripple outward in powerful ways. He left with a renewed understanding of human connection, carrying with him the lesson that presence, empathy, and patience can be as vital as any professional help, sometimes even more so when someone has felt invisible for too long. That night he walked away changed as well. He had seen the fragility and strength that coexist in people, and he had witnessed the impact that simple, caring attention can have. He knew he could not save everyone, nor could he take away years of pain, but he could make a difference by refusing to ignore someone's suffering. That understanding stayed with him long after the night ended, reminding him that the human capacity to care, even in quiet, small ways, is one of the most powerful forces in the world. The morning light crept slowly over the city, soft and gentle, as if it knew the night had carried too much weight for anyone to bear alone. She sat quietly on the same bench, her hands wrapped around a cup of warm tea he had helped her get. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small gesture, but it was enough to show that even small comforts could be meaningful. She sipped it slowly, feeling its warmth seep into her, and for a moment the heaviness inside her chest seemed a little lighter. The conversation from the previous night still lingered between them, unspoken but understood. He had stayed, listened, and made her feel seen. That simple presence had begun to change something inside her, a subtle shift she hadn't felt in years. She spoke softly, almost as if testing the air.
I don't know why I even started talking last night. I've kept so much inside for so long, I forgot what it felt like to let it out. Her voice wavered, not with weakness, but with honesty.
He nodded, letting her words settle without judgment. He didn't offer solutions or quick fixes. He simply sat, listening, giving her the space to continue in her own time. That was all she needed right now, a safe space to exist, to express herself, to be human without pressure. As the morning passed, he encouraged her to focus on very small steps. "We don't have to think about everything at once," he said gently. "Just the next step. The smallest thing you can do that feels possible." She thought for a moment, her eyes downcast, then slowly replied, "Maybe
I can just take a short walk today, outside for a few minutes.
It seemed almost laughable to her at first that something so simple could matter, but he smiled and nodded. Even the smallest steps count, he told her, and sometimes they are the most important. Those steps are the first threads in weaving hope back into life. They walked together, slowly, without rushing. The air was crisp, carrying the soft scent of early morning. She noticed the sunlight falling on the buildings, the way the wind moved the leaves in the trees, small details she hadn't seen in years. Psst. He pointed them out gently, not to lecture her, but to help her reconnect with the world around her.
Look at the way the sunlight touches that wall, he said softly.
It's beautiful. Little things like this exist even in hard times. She looked up and allowed herself a small smile, the first genuine one in a long time.
It was fragile, but it mattered. That small smile was proof that life still held moments worth noticing, moments she had forgotten she could feel.
As the day progressed, he helped her find other small ways to reconnect. They talked about writing down thoughts, even tiny ones, just to let them out of her mind.
They discussed listening to music that made her feel calm, or watching something light-hearted, just to allow herself a brief pause from pain.
He encouraged her to reach out to someone she trusted, someone who could help her feel supported beyond that morning.
The focus was not on solving everything at once, but on creating a foundation of small, achievable actions.
Every small step was a thread connecting her back to life, a bridge from despair to cautious hope.
She was hesitant at first, afraid of disappointment and failure. She had tried so many times to make things better, only to be met with setbacks. But with his guidance, she began to see that even failure is not the end. Sometimes trying, even imperfectly, is enough. Bet. She could allow herself to try without the fear of judgment, without the pressure to succeed immediately. This realization was freeing, almost like a breath of fresh air she had been holding back for years. For the first time, she considered that her life could contain moments of choice, of agency, of small victories, even if the bigger challenges remained.
Throughout the day, he remained patient, never pushing, never expecting her to move faster than she could.
Bah. His calm presence was steady, reassuring, and deeply human. She began to notice the subtle power of just being with someone who cared without conditions. She had been isolated for so long that she had almost forgotten that connection could exist without strings attached. That realization sparked a small flame inside her, one that reminded her that she was worthy of attention, care, and support. It was a fragile flame, but it was enough to keep moving forward, step by step. They also spent time revisiting her strengths, things she had long forgotten about herself. She spoke about moments in the past where she had overcome challenges, solved problems, and supported others. He reminded her that even though she had been broken and struggling, she still had qualities that mattered: resilience, empathy, creativity, and courage. She hesitated at first, doubting the significance of these traits, but slowly she began to accept that her past victories, however small, were evidence of her ability to navigate life. It was not about grand accomplishments. It was about acknowledging her own humanity and the quiet strengths she possessed. As the hours turned into afternoon, they returned to the bench where their first conversation had begun. She sat quietly, reflecting on the small steps she had taken and the progress she had made, however tentative. He encouraged her to notice even these small victories, reminding her that each one mattered. Life is not only about big changes. It is built from small, consistent actions that eventually shape a new reality. By paying attention to these actions, she began to realize that hope was not something distant or abstract. It was something tangible. Something she could cultivate in tiny, deliberate ways. By evening, she felt a sense of calm that had been absent from her life for a very long time. Not complete peace, not the end of her struggles, but a sense of relief that someone had been there with her through the darkness. She had felt seen, heard, and acknowledged. The trust she had placed in him, even temporarily, had begun to restore a part of her that had been lost. The part that believed she could survive, that she could continue, that she mattered. That fragile belief, nurtured by presence and patience, was the light she needed to begin moving forward. He knew his role was limited, but even within those limits, he had made a meaningful impact. He had not solved every problem or erased years of pain, but he had created a space where she could breathe, reflect, and begin to trust again.
He had reminded her that human connection, even in its simplest form, can be transformative.
Bass. Sometimes it is not dramatic gestures but steady, compassionate presence that helps a person start healing. And in that presence, she discovered something she had not realized in years. She was not alone, and she did not have to face her struggles entirely by herself. As the day came to an end, they walked together back to the spot where she had been sitting when he first noticed her brokenness. The sunlight had faded into soft evening shades, yet it felt warmer now, less oppressive. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting a quiet gratitude she struggled to put into words. He nodded gently, understanding that no words were necessary. The journey ahead would be long, filled with challenges and setbacks, but that day had planted the seed of possibility. Even in small ways, it had reminded her that life could contain moments of peace, connection, and hope. Before leaving, he encouraged her to continue these small steps on her own. "Keep noticing the little things," he said softly. "Keep taking one step at a time. You don't have to do it all at once. Just keep moving forward even if it's just a little each day." She nodded, absorbing the advice in her own way. It was not a command, not a demand, but an invitation to continue nurturing herself and reclaiming a life that had felt lost. That simple guidance was powerful because it was practical, compassionate, and realistic. As he walked away that evening, he reflected on the day and the subtle but profound progress that had occurred. The woman had begun to reconnect with herself, with her surroundings, and with the idea that life could still hold moments of light. The day had not erased her pain, but it had shown her that she could survive it, and even begin to thrive in small ways. He had witnessed the power of presence, patience, and gentle encouragement. He realized that sometimes the smallest actions, a kind word, a quiet presence, a shared moment, can ignite hope in ways that nothing else can. That evening, as she sat alone yet less lonely than before, she understood something vital. Healing does not happen all at once. It begins with tiny steps, small moments of connection, and the courage to allow someone in. That day had been one of those moments, and though the path ahead was still uncertain, she felt a renewed determination to continue, to keep taking one small step after another. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a life that could be lived with hope, however fragile. And that fragile hope, nurtured through the simplest of acts, became the foundation for what might come next.